I was in NYC over the weekend for PlantCon, super fun. Speaking of PlantCon, if y'all love kids books or you have grandchildren or you're a mama yourself and you love a cool book that has a really like an emotionally mature, that's not the phrase, emotionally, there's a depth of emotion that is taught in this book, and I really enjoyed it. Leaf's Gift. The author is Michael Wang. I got this at PlantCon. Illustrated by Lenny Wen. The illustrations are incredible. Okay, so grab it. I'm gonna try to see if it's on Amazon. I have a feeling it's not. My copy is signed by the author to my daughter. It's actually my daughter's copy. I read this to my daughter last night, and I actually really enjoy, like, this is one of my favorite ones. Spoiler alert, Leaf has an overabundance of plants, and he's a young boy. I love this. I have a feeling it's about, like, the author because he is like a plant seller now. Anyway, he has an overabundance of plants, and he learns about propagation, and he gives free plants to his entire neighborhood. Just love this book. Now there is what I believe is probably Procreate, but I have no problem with that. I mean, they're lovely. But yeah, I do love, like, I'm still dreaming of my own children's book, and mine will have, you know, low edited illustrations in it for sure, which that's what I kind of like. This is my guess. Now there is a very good chance with a very skilled person in Procreate could have gotten this effect, but I have a feeling these are hand painted, scanned, lightly edited. Okay, so to confirm, hand drawn, y'all. Hand drawn. So amazing. So amazing. Well, friends, after a little bit of housekeeping, we are ready to jump into water control. And this is possibly the most grief-inducing, frustrating part of watercolor. Now, it's typically taught in a way where we kind of use this visual metaphor of different drinks. All right, so, you know, coffee, tea, coffee with creamer, all the things. For whatever reason, that has never worked in my brain. So I'm going to present you with a different way of thinking about how much water to paint ratio to load on your brush to get the results you're after. Let's do this. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a look. I made some notes here. I do have a permanent video here on the channel about water control where I go into this. Now, I have added a little bit to that. So, wowed, wet on damp. I love the wowed concept where we bring damp into the conversation. We often hear about wet on dry, wet on wet, but wet on damp is all too often not discussed enough, or at all in some cases. All right, so here is where we're at, okay? And this is all under the wowed phrase. Wet on wet, we all know that. Wet on dry, we all know that. Wet on damp. Then we go to, I'm gonna go here. Damp on wet, damp on dry, damp on damp. And now something to think about, the first word in each one of these is your brush, and the second word is referring to your paper. So on wet paper, on dry paper, on damp paper. So it's your wet brush on wet paper. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. We're having a little class here. Yes. Okay. So damp on wet, damp brush on wet paper, damp brush on dry paper, damp brush on damp paper. Okay. And that is essentially it. And we're just going to run through every single one of them. I'm just going to show you an example. And I think it will seriously help you understand a little bit better. So let's just split the page. So we need 2, 4, 6. I don't know. We'll figure it out. I'm gonna split the page. I'm going to split the page. You can do this yourself. You have yourself some little charts. And we're going to just make our charts. We're going to do wet on wet. Wet brush on wet paper. All right. Wet on dry. Right. Wet on damp. Incredible, incredible refresher. So we'll start there. So wet on wet. Grab whatever brush. I don't care. It does not matter. Spray your paints. That is important. Spray your paints. Tonic is closest to me, so I'm using tonic right now. And I also feel the need to use up these massive, massive containers. They're so big. All right. So we're going to wet our page with clean water to understand. And you want it to be puddle-ish. Just so we want to push the envelope here, exaggerate, make it as wet really as we can, even drop some dots of water onto there, okay? So let me show you. Let me see if I can get that shine. There it is. Just show up, okay? That is how wet we want it. And we're going to make sure our brush is wet and we're going to head into the paint, all right? And I want to show you there's like a certain glisten that you're going to see on that brush. Do you see that? It's a little hard to see, but that's wet. She's almost dripping. If I were to shake this brush, like flick it, like we talked about in other lives, like Nicole likes to talk about, it would go everywhere. That's a good mental kind of touch point. All right. And then we're just going to put the color down. Y'all, this is wet on wet. All right. And when the page is wet, you have an opportunity to add more color and do incredibly fun things like this. I am rinsing in between colors here, if you're wondering, but I don't always. All right. That is wet on wet. That is the classic, watercolor magic that you see in like the viral videos of yesteryear. That is the quintessential watercolor. Now, wet on dry. So the same brush load. You want a glistening brush full of color. Same brush as before, but we're not wetting the paper. All right. Now, I'm not rinsing my brush in between here. I'm going to get some of that red off. And that is wet on dry. Couple of things are going to happen with wet on dry. Your color is going to intensify because there's nowhere for it to spread out. There just truly isn't. There's nowhere for it to spread out. All right. So I often start my paintings wet on dry because I like the control of it. I would have to make the generalization, and some may disagree, but in my estimations, much of traditional watercolor starts wet on wet. Yeah. Where you get the real like misty kind of, yeah. That's my estimation. Y'all, how do you feel? Do you feel that that's a correct statement? Traditional watercolor starting often wet on wet? Let me know in comments. I'd love to hear from you. So wet on dry is going to give you intensity. And it's going to give you control. All right. Wet on wet is going to give you, what is the word? It's the opposite. It's going to be sheer. So sheerness. And it's going to give you a bit of a chaotic start, to be honest. All right. Yeah, you would agree. Painting with Ashley agrees. Kim agrees. Debbie agrees. You know what I'm talking about. It's like I think of like folks who paint roses and they start with like a yellow and they've got it like dappled everywhere, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden they put a couple of strokes of a brighter color and there's a rose, but it's all still very soft. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. All right. So that is our first two. Then we've got wet on damp, and then we're going to move on to damp on what? Yeah. Remember, brush first on paper. So your damp brush on your wet paper. And the real fun thing, stick around, is going to be looking at these, evaluating these all when they're done side by side. And that is when the big aha moments happen with water control. Karen says, I paint almost everything wet on wet up until it's time for details. And that is the classic approach. It is a beautiful approach. Nothing wrong with it. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay. So how do we get damp? Well, you're going to put less water on the paper, and I'm going to try to show you in the light here. So we are going to make our paper damp, because remember, damp, the second word in these phrases, is talking about the paper. So let me show you what this looks like. Y'all know what damp is. It's like when your clothes come out of the dryer and they're still damp, a little cold to the touch, right? You see a little bit of sheen on the paper, but like I could do this and nothing's dripping off. If I had done that up here, when I laid down the water on that one first, it would have been everywhere, right? All right, but then again, we're gonna get that glistening full brush, right? And we're gonna get it on there. Now notice something. You're getting a softness. You're still getting color intensity like we did over here, but you're not getting the movement. Aha, it's lovely. It's lovely. All right, you're not getting the movement. That wasn't even wet enough. I want that a little wetter, right? And a red, but we got to make that brush wet. That brush needs to be juicy, sloppy wet, okay? You're getting movement, but notice it's slower. So you are getting movement, but it's slower. This, fantastic for skies, especially non-cloudy skies, but a lot of color in the sky. Right here, right here. All right. Anybody have an aha moment? Type aha. Anybody like, oh, all right. Damp brush on wet paper. So we're moving into the next series. Remember, we basically got 3 series of approaches to water control. And one of these is new. This wet on wet, wet on dry, wet on damp, and then damp on wet, damp on dry, damp on damp. I've discussed these in the permanent video. I'm going to have it linked below for you if you want to check that out for those of you watching this on the replay. Okay. But the new one today that I want to do, I basically took this concept and I want to break it down even more to help different brains understand better. Dry brush on wet paper, dry brush on dry paper, and dry brush on damp paper. All right. Wet on damp. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we got some ahas. Dan, Jennifer. Yeah, I like wet on damp as well. Yep. All right. So a damp brush on wet paper. So here we go again. We have got to make our paper wet. My water is not the cleanest already because I made the mistake. I couldn't decide which well to use for my rinsing well. All right. So let's show you again the look of that. You can see just how, I mean, that's like, I can't tip it too much. It's starting to go. Now we need a damp brush. What is a damp brush? When you put it on your hands, it feels cold and slightly wet, but it doesn't leave a droplet on your hand. Okay. That is a damp brush. And we're going to pick up some color on that damp brush and we're going to see what happens. Interesting. Interesting. Mm, mm. It's different. It's different. It's different. Look at that. So, less water on the paper. You're getting like that happy medium between this and this. Happy medium right here. If we drew a little, right? That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. Yes, definitely. Wet on damp is not one that we see enough. It's not one that we remember enough. Okay. So what are the differences here? And I know your brain might be like literally vibrating because this is a lot. But if you're feeling overwhelmed right now watching this, I want you to stick with it. Okay, we're going. This is here. I want you to watch, but I want you to rewatch and do it yourself, and it will become part of you over time. All right? So notice what's the difference here? We've got damp paper, or sorry, damp brush on wet paper compared to wet brush on damp paper. More intensity here, but not as intense as here. Diffusion here with almost no diffusion here. Does that make sense? If this makes sense, just type a Y in the comment section. All right. All right, I've got to make another one. So damp on wet. We need to then do damp on dry and damp on damp. Damp brush on dry paper. And then damp on damp. I would highly recommend making these little charts for yourself. I've always been a chart girly, which I know is weird considering my general personality, but the charts work for my brain. Okay. So, all right, damp brush. So remember, cold to the touch. That's a little too wet, but not leaving any droplets. Okay. Damp brush on dry paper. Keeping it damp though. We got to keep it damp for this particular technique to really show its colors. Pun intended. I'm loading a little more orange here, but keeping it just damp. Oh yeah. Where could that come in handy? Maybe you're starting a more realistic painting and you want more of a controlled feel, but still a soft feel. Okay. This is soft, but more explosive and chaotic. This is soft, but controlled. All right. So let's make a note. Soft, but controlled. Do we have an aha moment here? I feel like we might. I feel like we might. Do we have another aha moment here? All right. Let's go up here and name this. All right. Wet on damp gave us diffused intensity. Diffused intensity. Okay. Damp on wet. What would you call this one, friends? Damp on wet gave us what? A damp brush on wet paper gave us what? Yeah, we got some aha moments. Sunsets, right, Jennifer? Damp on dry, absolutely. Also gives texture. So it could be really good for the underpainting, the first layers of a grassy field that's eventually going to get some dry brush, dry on dry texture. Orange creamsicle. It gave us orange creamsicle. Yes. So if we have diffused intensity here, so we've still got the intense color, but we've got a softness that we couldn't get with wet on dry, right? So here we've got the softness, but it's less chaotic. Soft, calm, bright. still bright. We still have the ability to get brightness here. All right. Let's go to damp on damp. We're going to make our paper damp. There's going to be color on it because my water is just not clean anymore perfectly. I'm going to scrub out that yellow schmutzy, but we're going to make this damp. And then we're going to paint on it with a damp brush. All right. And I think what you're going to probably anticipating here is that we are going to get a softer, it's going to be a softer version of this, which is so helpful. You're not going to get the texture, and that is 100% correct. Now it's pouring. Okay, it's raining outside. Damp brush, damp paper. You do have to work fast with this, or you are going to get this effect. So this technique is so powerful, but you have to work fast. Because damp, anything that's damp doesn't stay damp for long. All right. All right. Do a little red here, a little damp red. You can already see it drying. Is damp on damp how you ombre? It's one of the ways. You can certainly ombre with wet on wet, but you're not going to get as smooth of an ombre. So if you want a smooth ombre, that's such a great point. Let me write this in here. This will give you a smooth ombre. Ombre is light to dark or dark to light, whichever. And this will give you, the wet on wet will give you a more wild ombre, a less predictable ombre effect. And that is such a missing element. When we, pulling is often what traditionally is what ombre is called. I never understood it. I do understand it, but pulling. So when pulling is taught, I don't think there's enough attention often put on the wetness of the paper and the wetness of the brush. It's often taught wet on wet. And I think that leaves something to be desired in kind of our working use of these techniques as artists. If this is all making sense, let me know. Just type sense, spelled any which way you want. Damp on damp, easy blending. Yes, Debbie. Yes, exactly. You're getting it. Y'all are getting it. Sense. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah. The soft middle. All these damp techniques, it is such a good point. Kaylin, the soft middle. All right. Okay, so we've got, let's just take a look and look at the evolution. You can see it. Wet on wet gives you intensity. When the paint is wet on a wet brush and it's put into a wet paper, you're still getting intensity, depending on the paint formulation, but generally speaking, intense, middle ground, soft. Isn't that fascinating? Question, Virginia, answer. How wet should the paints be? Just a normal spritz. Yeah, and honestly, if you feel like let's just say you're doing wet on wet, right? And you pull up, you have enough wetness on your brush to pull up the paint, but then you feel like your brush isn't wet enough to get the explosion you want on the wet paper. Just do a little quick dip in your water. My water's off screen here. Just do a little quick dip and go to it. It's that easy to wet your brush that already has paint on it. All right, we're going to put these up here and we're going to keep moving on. So now we are on to our last, what is this? We've got 9, right? 3, 4, 6. Okay, we're on to our last 3. So we've got dry on wet, and ding, 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 friends, these are the new ones. Now, the concept, the what happens on paperness of this concept I'm about to show you is not new. It's just not spoken enough about. It doesn't have a light shown on it enough. Okay, so dry brush. Now cat's out of the bag. A dry brush in watercolor is not fully dry. It's just not. On wet paper. Oh yeah, and if you think this one's going to be fun, you would be correct. And then we've got dry brush. Just going to add these words just to remind you, on dry paper. Now, in all of this, whenever we say dry paper, the paper is indeed completely dry. But when we talk dry brush in watercolor, y'all know if there's not any presence of moisture, that paint you pick up, for the most part, isn't going to move very far at all. Okay, so there's a little bit of moisture there. Okay, all right, dry brush. I'm going to go with my filbert because these are all about control, in my opinion. So a dry brush, it is your damp brush, but like blotted a couple times. All right. And then you're going into a pan of watercolor and it shouldn't be soupy or puddly. Okay. Dry brush. Oh, I forgot to wet the paper. Let's just spray it. So dry brush, which is just a few pats drier than damp. Load it with color. It's going to feel like nothing's going to come off of this. You're going to be like loading this. You're going to be like, it feels pasty. You know you did it right. Here we go. Y'all, I hope you saw that. Look at that. There's hardly any color on here. There's hardly any moisture on here. I'm drying it off even more. I'm going into the yellow. Look at that. Oceans, calm oceans. Okay. And nothing. This is what I want you to realize. This is probably your biggest aha moment of the day. Nothing we've done so far of the traditional techniques looks anything like dry on wet. If you agree, type agree. I don't know how you could not agree. But why aren't we talking about this? Well, we are now. All right. Mary had fun playing with dry brush on wet paper earlier for abstract flowers. And that's the beauty of it. Great for abstracts. But again, beach coastlines, distant, the first layers of like distant shrubbery in a field, sky, the beginnings of a moody sky, right? Okay, agree, just wow, agree, right? And I'm not trying to be like, I got it all figured out. But I will say this, one of my superpowers I've learned over the last 6 years or so, is that I have an ability, I feel God has gifted me with a way of breaking things down when it comes to watercolor. And this is something I've realized. And this whole missing this dry section of wowed. So I think wowed now has to become wowed. Okay? I think it has to become wowed with 2 D's. Y'all, if you're having a good time, this would be a great time to share this live because I do feel like we're having like a moment here. I do feel like we're having a moment. Okay? And I want more people to be in on the moment because we are not an exclusive community. We are an inclusive community. Okay? All right. So, agree. Yes. Karen, stormy clouds. And that's the thing, y'all. That's why I'm not sitting here being like I invented the wheel. No, y'all are using these techniques. These are happening every day. But when you don't have the words to call it out, sometimes it can fly under your own brain's radar. And, knowledge is power. Being able to isolate a technique is so powerful in the journey. All right, friends, let's move on to the dry brush again on dry paper. Now, this is one that a lot of us know to call out, but it's just called dry brush technique. But the reality is you have to understand not just what's happening with your brush, you have to understand what's happening with your paper. In all of water control, if you don't understand the symbiotic relation between your brush, your water, and your paper, and where your paint lies in that, you're missing a lot. This is water control. It's not just about water. It never was. It's not just about water. It never was. I'm so glad you're here, Candy. Welcome. Deborah says, you're teaching how to put the wheels on the cart so we can easily roll down the hill. Exactly. Because I feel like so much of watercolor and art making in general is dragging your cart. I want to make your cart move like Thrifty's voice carries in the wind, like velvet butter. And knowledge is power. All right? Knowledge is power. Okay? You didn't know I was taking you to watercolor church today. Welcome, friends. Welcome to watercolor church. All right? Woo. Oh, yeah, baby. All right, dry brush on dry paper. This is the one we're going to be familiar with. But remember, you still want that brush to be cool to the touch, or it's not going to do much. Now, see how this is leaving like a wetness on my hand? It's too wet. So I'm going to blotting here, down here in the corner. Blot, blot, blot. And then I'm going to tap, 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 and kind of scrub on some color. And then we're going to scrub on. And this is what dry brush looks like. All right. Dry brush, you can control. You could do it with a smaller brush. I'm going to grab my 000, make sure it's just slightly damp. Okay. I'm thinking grass. I'm thinking, pebbles from a distance. Obviously not this color unless you're in Utah, southern Utah. All right. That is dry brush. That is your classic dry brush. But we are now understanding what is happening with the trifecta. What's happening on our brush, what's happening with the paint on our brush, what's happening with our paper. Okay, so this is traditional dry brush. Wonderful. Yes, this is the OG for texture. I couldn't have said it better myself. Okay, wait, no, Tracy. Absolutely not. Nobody feels dumb here. You've talked about water control forever, but I didn't really get how the water control and the watercolor drills go together. But do you get it now? Is that what you're telling me? Is this you verbalizing an aha moment? Because that's what it sounds like to me. Because the drills really are just you mapping out, you're isolating the techniques. That's what we're doing today with water control. Water control drills, all the drill part of it means is that we are isolating the techniques from a painting. And that's why drills are so useful, because we're taking the techniques out of the context and the mental load of a painting. Yep. Yes, she had an aha moment, y'all. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I gotta tell you, we're getting down to something when I start taking notes on my back paper, on my backdrop paper. You know it, because that means my brain needs to get something out, and I need to get it out immediately. But it usually means also that what's coming out are like epiphanies. Yes, so good to redo and relearn fundamentals, and I started it last week. With the brush drills in the unique way. If you haven't seen that one, let me indeed take a moment here to grab that. because it would be great for you to go back and watch this. This was last week's brush drills, but done all on one page. And these were all, this is all 13 of my brushes, right, y'all? I have 13 brushes, 13 unique brushes, all of them on one page. So I'm going to link that below as well, so you can be sure to give that a look. Okay, last one for the day, friends. We've got dry on damp. Let's see what this baddie is going to do. And then we're going to look at all of them together, because that's important. That is going to give you context. And I believe, you know, I struggled in school so hard. And I struggled really hard until ninth grade. And I still, even when I had my educational epiphany and figured out how I best learned, and I best learned by writing things down. Go figure. But even after my epiphany, I still had to work my tail off, right? Where was I going with this? I don't know. I think I know. I struggled in school so much. Yes. And what I learned is that learning is so much, what I don't care what subject, is about connecting dots in a way that makes sense for your brain. Okay? And for the lucky ones, maybe it's a linear path. But for many of us, it is the exact opposite of a linear path. So that is why when folks ask me, why do you change the names of techniques that have been around for forever? Why do you change the names? Because I'm making a dot for somebody so they can understand it better. I'm making a dot here. That name change might connect a dot here. Just that simple name change, right? Why don't I teach water control with the tea, coffee, creamer approach? Because if it doesn't work for me, if it doesn't connect the dots in my brain, I guarantee there's someone else out there it doesn't connect the dots for. So teaching it a different way is me making a new dot. Tradition is here. All right. Tradition, the traditional way of teaching watercolor. Y'all, it works. It works. And it is a heavy, thick line in our community. It is an honored line in our community. But for those of us that hang out here, it feels really heavy sometimes because it just doesn't make sense. So I got dots here and I got connectors here that will eventually lead you, boom, back here to this. And then it doesn't feel so heavy anymore. It clicks. And this straight line doesn't make nearly as much sense to me as all this noise. Because this is my brain spilled out on paper and organized in a way that I understand. And I'm grateful that it works for some of you here. All right. I'm telling you what? We are most definitely at Watercolor Church today. And I'm feeling pretty good about it. We're at Watercolor Church. I'll take it at church. No, that's not a good song. Watercolor Church. Sorry. You know why. You know what I'm doing. This was the pen I kept getting everywhere earlier. Color Church. And I only use the church reference because I can start to sound a little preachy because I'm an evangelical. If you're gonna put a title on my religion, I'm an evangelical. So I got me some background in like the church speak. I truly just kid. Love my church. Love my God. All right. All right, dry brush. So remember, cold, but not leaving any residue on whatever you're tapping on. Okay. Now, damp paper. I'm going to do this with a bigger brush. Okay, let me show you. You could do it with a spray bottle, but what you're most likely going to have to do is spray it and then sweep it away to get a true dampness. So that's another way to do it. All right. And then dry brush, let's pick up some color. It's going to feel, remember, when you pick it up, I've got no puddles here. It's going to feel sticky. This is so good. Look at this, y'all. It's diffused. It can be intense if you load up that color, right? But if you don't have a lot, if it's more evenly distributed, like right here on the brush, if when you load the color, you just sweep across, it can be so soft, so incredibly lovely and soft. Look at that. Y'all, this is watercolor. This is watercolor. This is watercolor. This is watercolor. Yep, this too. This is watercolor. And of course, this is watercolor. Yeah, we'll do color theory. Absolutely. Absolutely, my friends, my buddies. Bird feathers. Let's call out some other things this would be so helpful for. I'm going to say fuzzy fillers, greenery in your florals. But look at that. I still have enough dampness on the brush to get the intensity, right? You can dry it off more if you want that color, but you don't want the intensity. Look at that. You can scrub that. You can almost like color in and look at it, just picks up the glorious texture of your paper. Now, I'm not pressing hard here, so I'm not damaging my brush. Oh, I love that. Virginia used my travel dagger and made circles. Looks like a rose. Virginia, I'd love to see that. Friends, just so you know, there is a new-ish functionality here. There's a community tab. If you go to the main page of my channel, there's a community tab. And guess what? Guess what? Guess what? You can post photos of projects that you do. So I would encourage you all, if in the next week, if you think of it, I don't care if it's a project you did from a video of mine that was 3 years ago. I would love to see those projects. I would love to see what you've done, how far you've come, aha moments you've had through photos, and you can share it on that community tab. All right. So the community tab used to be where I could only make posts. Now that's called posts. The community tab is yours. All right. Yes, Debbie, fur on animals. Yes, yes, yes. Sarah just had an aha moment. She just learned that her damp paper, what she thought was damp, has been too wet. I love that so much. Yes. All right, friends, let's take a look. Let's take a look at all of these together. And let's just get in our last round of aha moments. All right, we started with the tradition. Wet on wet, wet on dry, wet on damp. Then we went to not so traditional concepts of water control. Damp on dry, damp on damp, and that wraps up our wet and damp water control elements. And then we've got dry on wet, dry on dry, and dry on damp. You can see the progression. Put them in a line, you see the progression even more. I'm doling out aha moments here, y'all. I'm doling out aha moments. Do you see it? Type yes if you see it. And thank you, Sarah. Don't forget to give a boop. Don't forget to give a boop. There she is. Friends, what a good time today we've had. Have we not? Awesome. All right, friends. Go get it. Go chase those aha moments. Get it, get it, get it. All right, friends. Thank you so much. Have an incredible day. I got to get going.